Some 15 years ago, basketball gamers got their hands on the NBA Elite 11 demo. Less than a week later, the launch was postponed. Unsurprisingly, the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 versions were officially cancelled in early November, though an iOS version was still released. As such, NBA Elite 11 and its demo is one of the most infamous blunders in the history of basketball gaming, and perhaps even gaming as a whole. You're probably familiar with the embarrassing issues with the NBA Elite 11 demo that doomed the full version. Janky animations, clumsy controls, 3-point hook shots, and most infamously, Jesus Bynum T-posing at midcourt like Christ the Redeemer towering above Rio de Janeiro. It's no surprise that the demo was poorly received, and the game ultimately cancelled. Still, there's something fascinating about the NBA Elite 11 demo, which is why I'm looking back at it 15 years later. It's also a bit of a do-over for me. The impressions I posted on the NLSC all those years ago were, well, far kinder than they should have been. I wasn't trying to shill, but hope and optimism led me to be a bit too diplomatic and open-minded to a fault. And so, this is an honest look back at the disaster that was the NBA Elite 11 demo. As most longtime basketball gamers know all too well, NBA Elite 11 was a failed attempt at revamping a series that had fallen into second place behind NBA 2K, both in sales and critical reception. EA's game had hit rock bottom with NBA Live 07, but by NBA Live 10, it was seemingly back on track with a fine release. However, even as NBA Live 10 was in development, EA were in the midst of an 18-month plan to overhaul their basketball game in a big way. That overhaul was to be accompanied by a rebrand to NBA Elite, the first name change for the series since NBA Live 95 succeeded NBA Showdown. Hindsight being 2020, EA should have scrapped the idea, or at least delayed it, in light of NBA Live 10's favourable reception. The 18-month development cycle simply wasn't long enough to deliver a polished product. And so, NBA Elite 11 sadly squandered all of the progress that had been made since NBA Live 08. Unfortunately, the wheels were already in motion. Before I dive into the NBA Elite 11 demo, I wanted to mention a 2018 Polygon article by Owen Good. Reflecting on the NBA Elite 11 demo and his unwillingness to delete it, he made the point that while it was a fascinating train wreck, it was neither misunderstood nor ahead of its time, and shouldn't be seen as such. On one hand, I'm inclined to agree. It's not a hidden gem that we simply weren't ready for. On the other hand, there are some interesting ideas, including some that NBA 2K has adopted. It suggests that they might have worked if they were done better. Much, much better. So let's talk about where NBA Elite 11 went wrong. It begins with the game taking cues from EA's NHL series, including making one of the NHL producers its creative director. It was a questionable decision to put somebody with a background in hockey in charge of their long-running basketball series. Even if some of the ideas and goals as far as player control were well-intentioned, concepts meant for a hockey game didn't exactly translate to a basketball title. The core concept of moving away from using the face buttons, and instead primarily using the shoulder buttons and analog sticks for player control, was an idea that was borrowed from the NHL series. Basically, the left stick controlled a player's feet and thus their movement, while the right stick controlled their hands, i.e. dribbling and shooting. Actions such as passing were on the shoulder buttons, avoiding the need to move your thumb from the sticks to the face buttons, except for icon passing. You can see the logic, but it was a drastic change. In the new Elite control system, the right stick is used for both dribble moves and shooting. Flicking the stick performs crossovers and other dribble moves, while holding it attempts a shot. In other words, it's basically like the Pro Stick in modern NBA 2K titles. The main difference is that it was the only way to shoot using the Elite controls. Again, the idea was to move basic actions away from the face buttons. Most significantly, right stick shooting also introduced shot aiming. Shooting was no longer just a matter of timing the release. That was still necessary, but the right stick also needed to be pushed straight up, or as close to it as possible, in order to properly aim an attempt. Making a shot therefore required the angle of the right stick to be within the good aim zone, and for it to be released within the appropriate window. The size of the aiming zone and the release window varied depending on a player's abilities and where they were on the floor. If this sounds very similar to some of the shot aiming mechanics we've seen in NBA 2K, that's because it is. In fact, during Mike Breen's introduction of the new controls in the NBA Elite 11 demo, they're described as being entirely skill-based, eliminating the dice roll that governed shooting in previous games, a promise and goal that's been outlined in so many NBA 2K developer blogs in recent years. In that sense, some of NBA Elite 11's ideas could be seen as ahead of their time. To Owen Good's point though, they weren't implemented well, so again, it wasn't just a case of gamers not being ready for them. Moreover, shot aiming and concepts such as green or miss have been divisive even when they've been done well in NBA 2K. In any case, whatever merit NBA Elite 11's concepts may have had, the execution made it a moot point. To be blunt, the new controls were incredibly clunky. Jump shots are admittedly straightforward. Push the right stick up as straight as possible, and then release it at the right moment. It's not unlike NBA 2K17, where shot aiming did work fairly well. It actually works great for free throws, and is arguably one of the best ideas for foul shooting outside of the T-meter or NBA 2K17's approach. Other shots don't feel as intuitive though. For example, layups are executed by rotating the stick a quarter circle from left or right to straight up, again aiming for that make zone and release window. It allowed us to choose whether we wanted to go up with our left or right hand, which was nice, but it's quite cumbersome to pull off, even in the free shoot-around, let alone when there's a defender to worry about. On the bright side, dunks were performed by simply holding the stick straight up while moving towards the basket. It works fine for slamming it down on the move, though standing dunks under the rim don't always trigger on cue. It's never a good sign when performing basic moves in the paint feels so needlessly complex. Of course, much like shot aiming and other divisive mechanics in NBA 2K, complexity isn't the only issue in NBA Elite 11. Once you get the hang of it, shooting can become too easy, to the point of effortlessly making shots that should be tough. This is where those 3-point hook shots come in. Because they're not just restricted to when you're posting up on the block, hook shots can be put up from anywhere. Master the timing and aiming, and you'll be skyhooking from downtown with ease. Like long-range turnaround fadeaways having a green release window in NBA 2K26, it highlights the drawback of so-called skill-based mechanics. Meanwhile, at the defensive end, steals are performed by moving the right stick straight down. A simple enough input, but the results still leave much to be desired. Conversely, jumping to block or rebound is performed by moving the right stick straight up. It feels really unnatural to use the right stick for blocking and rebounding, plus it eliminated the very useful hands-up method of contesting shots. There are also way too many interceptions, especially by the CPU. There is an alternate control scheme that's similar to NBA Live 10 and earlier games, and it does make gameplay feel somewhat more accessible. Unfortunately, neither the Elite nor alternate control scheme includes a sprint control. The idea was that dribbling moves would allow players to be explosive, and that they generally move at the speed they needed to. The reality is that players are way too sluggish, and therefore unable to make explosive moves in the half-court or get out and run on the break. Recovering on defense is virtually impossible, and CPU players feel a step quicker besides. Why NBA Elite 11 sought to get rid of the sprint control, one of the most important improvements in the history of the series, and one that allowed NBA Live 95 to be such a big jump from the NBA playoffs games, is utterly baffling. I guess it may have worked better in the NHL series, but it definitely didn't suit virtual basketball. It once again raises the question, why was somebody with a hockey background at the helm of an NBA title? The controls weren't the only new aspect on display in the NBA Elite 11 demo. The overhaul also introduced a new motion engine with real-time physics. This was meant to improve the feel of the game, and to be fair, you can see some loose balls getting battered around, as well as players colliding and falling over in ways they didn't before. However, that's where the positives end. To put it very kindly, the new tech was extremely unpolished. The animations are stiff and awkward, players don't control well, with movement feeling very restricted. Without a sprint control, you're constantly getting stuck to defenders. NBA Live 10 had a few janky animations here and there, but NBA Elite 11 was such a huge step backwards in that regard. Not only does the demo look rough, but it feels rough on the sticks. Obviously, any kind of jankiness isn't ideal, but if a game feels good and is fun enough despite some wonky animations, it may be tolerable. And that's why the NBA Elite 11 demo was such a bust. The gameplay wasn't good enough, wasn't enjoyable enough to look past subpar aesthetics or any other flaws. Not many people who played it came away saying, well, it may look janky, but it's actually surprisingly fun once you get past that. If that were the case, there might have been a slim hope for NBA Elite 11. As it stands, the gameplay just had too many issues. Now, it is possible to make the controls work, especially the alternate scheme based on NBA Live 10. You can even produce some highlights, though most of them will likely occur through sheer dumb luck. While revisiting the demo, I had some nice alley-oops, but also a couple of missed connections, none of which I meant to throw. Out of habit, I was holding the right trigger in a vain attempt to sprint, resulting in some accidental lobs. Other than that, a couple of the steals and pick and rolls that led to dunks were kind of satisfying, but they were the outliers in otherwise clunky gameplay. In other words, you can hit shots, whether you're using the right stick or the button with the alternate control scheme. Trying to defend is often a miserable affair, but you can kind of adjust and get some stops. You can take control of the Celtics or the Lakers, play the final 5 minutes of the fourth quarter of Game 7 of the 2010 NBA Finals, and get the W. You can achieve some positive results. For the most part though, it's not going to be a great virtual basketball experience. See, that's what the get good crowd overlooks. It's not about complexity. Indeed, a contrived mechanic can end up being too easy, but whether or not the gameplay feels intuitive, natural, and enjoyable. Most of us can get used to broken mechanics and make them work for us, but it's not very satisfying. It's not a skill issue, as people like to say. It's dislike for the design, and in cases such as the NBA Elite 11 demo, issues with the underlying technology. And those are the real problems with the NBA Elite 11 demo, and the full version for that matter. Sure, the 3-point hook shots look silly, and the glitch with Bynum in the T-pose was absolutely embarrassing for EA Sports. They've understandably become synonymous with the demo and the failure of NBA Elite 11 because they're infamous and aptly illustrate its shortcomings. When it comes down to it though, they're not what actually sunk the game. After all, the Bynum glitch doesn't happen every time for every one, and you have to go out of your way to manually shoot a hookshot from downtown to see one, let alone make it. Both are issues that feasibly could have been fixed, if not in the demo, then certainly in a day one patch for the retail version. The same can't be said for the janky animations, player motion and physics, and the cumbersome controls. Put it this way, if the gameplay in the NBA Elite 11 demo had been otherwise impressive, if the new controls panned out and most people had fun with it, 3-point hookshots and Jesus Bynum wouldn't have been enough to doom the game. The narrative would have been, well, the demo has some weird glitches that need to be fixed, but man, everything else was a blast. They're really onto something here. Of course, that wasn't the case, so the embarrassing glitches were the cherry on top, or rather, the nail in the coffin. Again, there are much bigger issues, but those are the ones that have come to represent the demo's failures. Speaking of fixes, there was talk that it might be possible to patch in a sprint control. That might have made a slight improvement, but the gameplay still would have been plagued by unpolished tech. From controls to animations to AI, it just doesn't play a good enough game of basketball. Again, it's easy to point to Jesus Bynum or the 3-point hook shots and credit them with the downfall of NBA Elite 11. They certainly went a long way in making the demo a laughingstock. Had they been the only real issues with it though, EA could have easily joined in the jokes, rolled with the punches, and promised to fix them in the retail version. In that scenario, we'd probably all end up happy. Of course, that's not how it went down. NBA Elite 11 was just too broken. The retail version is no better, and the folks who attended the community event, including our own P-Dub, were mostly left unimpressed. With or without those glitches, it was destined to be a flop. I'll admit that I didn't want that to be the case in 2010. I tried to remain optimistic, find the fun in the demo. It did and still does play slightly better with the alternate controls. It's less frustrating anyway, and I suggested that setting as a possible solution when I gave my impressions. I was definitely wearing rose-coloured glasses though, like I said, being open-minded to a fault. I didn't declare it to be the best thing I'd ever played or anything like that, but my optimism was nevertheless myopic. The NBA Elite 11 demo was bad then, and it's bad now. And bad is being really kind. Conceptually and mechanically, the NBA Elite 11 demo, and by extension the retail version, was a bust. Even the new name didn't roll off the tongue as easily. It was a massive blunder, made all the worse by the fact that NBA Live 10 had been a good release, one that restored some faith in the series. If NBA Live 10 had been as bad as NBA Live 07, then sure, you could understand taking the risk. Much like a team launching a barrage of threes in a frantic attempt to cut into a deficit, it'd be a case of desperate times calling for desperate measures. Instead, much like a team squandering possessions with needless heaves that clank off the rim, NBA Elite 11 foolishly put the series in a hole that it never managed to get out of, though by some miracle, there was still a glimmer of hope come the 8th generation. It's just a shame that EA had committed to the revamp and rebrand. Maybe with more time, it could have turned out better. Maybe if they'd stuck with what they had for one more year, the success of an NBA Live 11, built on NBA Live 10's foundation, might have saved them from going down the wrong path. It's also a bummer because NBA Elite 11 was set to have some good content. The FIBA teams were going to be updated, and a few new wrinkles were added to Dynasty mode. A career mode, Become Legendary, was set to debut, and it featured some creative ideas for challenges and player progression. There was going to be a 5-on-5 online league, the EA Sports Basketball Association, that was basically a forerunner to the Prime modes we now have. ESPN presentation was expanded, with a new commentary team featuring Mike Breen, Jeff Van Gundy, and Mark Jackson. That would have been awesome to see in a game very similar to NBA Live 10, only with even more polish. Sadly, it wasn't to be. And so, some 15 years ago, NBA Elite 11's disastrous demo put the brakes on the retail release just days before it was set to launch. By November, it was cancelled, with leaked copies becoming very expensive collector's items. The series would struggle to make a strong comeback, beginning with the cancellation of NBA Live 13, following the decision to forgo a 2012 season release. NBA Live 14 wasn't good, and EA ended up skipping NBA Live 17 as well, but NBA Live 15, 16, 18, and 19 were more commendable efforts. I've had fun with them, but they didn't make a big enough splash, and NBA Live 19 marks the last release to date. The 2010 reboot of NBA Jam was also affected by the NBA Elite 11 demo. A stripped-down digital version of NBA Jam was set to be packaged with NBA Elite 11, with paid DLC unlocking the full game. Instead, the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 versions of NBA Jam 2010 were standalone releases, leading to the misconception that EA was trying to sell a full game that they were originally giving away for free, which wasn't the case. Ultimately, it didn't matter. The damage was done, and although NBA Jam on Fire Edition would be a success for EA Sports, NBA Elite 11 was a devastating blow to NBA Live. It's a prime example of how to ruin a long-running series. EA obviously weren't hoping for infamy, but all the same, the blunders of NBA Elite 11 and its demo make it a significant release, or non-release as the case may be. There's no reason to play the demo, or a leaked copy, or the pirated version that's out there in the wilderness, except out of curiosity. Of course, that's arguably still a valid reason. It's an interesting study of how not to make a sim basketball game, especially when you had a far superior one to build upon. Seek it out if you're curious. The Xbox 360 demo is in the NLSC's downloads database, but don't expect to find a hidden treasure. However, I'd suggest it'll increase your appreciation for NBA Live 10, and even some of the rougher NBA Live titles that did end up coming out. Revisiting the NBA Elite 11 demo in 2025, I can't help but wonder what might have been if not for the baffling decision to go in that direction. It's quite likely that NBA 2K would remain the top brand today, but we might at least still have a viable and enjoyable alternative in NBA Live. From gameplay to modes, having to scrap NBA Elite 11 and start all over again just widened the gap and made getting to where NBA Live needed to be, let alone catching up to NBA 2K, a tall order indeed. It may not have entirely sunk the NBA Live series, but it certainly wasn't shipshape after that, and it's now been in dry dock for years. Mind you, it's a cautionary tale for NBA 2K as well. As Visual Concepts caters to the online elitists with attempts at skill-based mechanics, NBA Elite 11 is worth pointing out as an example of how it can go really, really wrong. In fact, with online gamers shooting ridiculous percentages from 3-point range in NBA 2K26, I'd suggest that NBA 2K hasn't learned from NBA Elite 11's ill-fated mechanics. Sure, the rest of the game is far superior, but concepts such as shot aiming and green or miss are problematic. NBA Elite 11 should be a cautionary tale in basketball game development, not just a victory lap for Visual Concepts in their long-standing rivalry with EA Sports. As for us gamers, the NBA Elite 11 demo is many things. A disappointment, a source of humour, a curiosity, a turning point, a what if. It's fair enough to laugh at it and say that it sucked. It's earned that scorn, along with derisive nicknames such as NBA Delete 11. However, basketball gaming is in a worse place thanks to the failure of the NBA Elite 11 demo, and the way that it ultimately led to a lack of competition and alternatives in the long run. It's why I won't celebrate its failure, but I'll absolutely call it terrible, and explain why it's terrible. Elite was never a good name anyway, but by being anything but an Elite product, the demo put a swift end to that brand. At the end of the day, it proves the old saying true: never bring hockey mechanics to a basketball video game. And if that's not an old saying, let's make it one moving forward. 15 years later, I don't think there can be any doubt that NBA Elite 11 remains the worst mistake an experienced basketball video game developer has ever made.